Hasta luego.
I'm not sure if a perfect video game exists. A game that has no flaws, no imperfections, no negative points. It's harder to say that a game is perfect than it is to say that a film is perfect. There's less surface area to make mistakes. There's other mediums for imperfections to bleed their way in through bugs, graphics, gameplay. Every game most likely has something wrong with it. Even if it's something small, there are still little things that you could pick apart, that you could complain about. I don't think a perfect game exists, because it's nearly impossible to pull it off. That being said, Resident Evil 4 is just about as close as you can possibly get to perfection. The change in gameplay fits the series so well. It feels like Resident Evil was always this way. Not that it makes you forget the past, but that it makes you excited for the future. The new camera angle, the action style, the new setting just all work so well in conjunction with each other. And just because the game turns its attention to the action doesn't mean that it forgets the horror. The enemy design is well balanced. Grotesque creations that make you want to run and hide, but force you to engage. It's the same premise, just interpreted differently. The new story gives the series a breath of fresh air, moving it away from the things that were holding it back and sending it in a completely new direction. Interesting characters, some that are refreshed and new versions of themselves, others that are new additions entirely. The gameplay and progression is just so damn fun. It still manages to make you think in combat, to try and conserve your resources. And just like all the previous entries, it uses this conservation to build tension. Environment design, new enemy types, and tons of additional weaponry creates a plethora of different situations that put fear at the forefront. The new enemies are terrifying on their own, muttering words in a different language as they pursue you. The game is constructed through environment, location, and narrative to make you feel like an outsider. The new gameplay system even feeds back into this. How can you feel at home when you don't even know how to interface with this world? Player choice is emphasized with the weapon systems. The new merchant mechanic allows us to feel progression as we get it, and customization of our weapons makes the playthrough feel like it's truly yours. There's a laundry list of things I could mention that this game does well, but I hesitate to call Resident Evil 4 perfect, not because it isn't an amazing game, but because it doesn't fit the literal definition. There are some small things that I don't like. The game might run just a bit too long, like maybe by 30 minutes or so. There are some annoying sequences that make you wait around for an elevator to arrive, and the QuickTime events can feel a little cheap in certain areas. But as far as actual criticisms go, that's about it. Resident Evil 4 is one of the greatest games ever made. But this stringent attachment to the textbook definition of perfection leaves me hesitating to crown it with that achievement. But maybe this shouldn't hold the game back. Maybe Resident Evil 4 really is perfect at the end of the day, and close is enough. Because this video isn't about whether Resident Evil 4 is good or not. That's not up for debate. It's about whether Resident Evil 4 manages to touch the stars and achieve perfection. So what makes Resident Evil 4 so close to this unachievable goal? That's what I'm going to try and find out today. If you haven't seen my previous videos on the Resident Evil games, you can find them in this playlist here. It's not mandatory, but these videos will provide more context to the series overall. If you enjoy the video, give it a like and subscribe to the channel. You can also find the link in my Patreon in the description, where I've been reviewing the Resident Evil movies. Go check those out if you're interested. I just released the episode on Resident Evil Afterlife. Spoilers for Resident Evil 4. Hey Dad, it's me, your favorite son, and today I'd like to talk about Resident Evil 4. While Resident Evil is known for its messy development cycles, Resident Evil 2 having a full restart, changing course massively with Resident Evil 3, and Resident Evil 0 shifting entirely from the N64 to the GameCube, Resident Evil 4 has probably the most messy development of them all. After the release of the two beefier sort of spin-off, sort of not titles, Resident Evil Code Veronica and Resident Evil 0, Capcom turned their vision back to the official mainline series, wanting to create an actual sequel to Resident Evil 3. When announced, the game was originally planned for the PlayStation 2, and this made sense for the time as Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3 had all released on the Sony PlayStation 1. Code Veronica and 0 were released on secondary platforms, the Dreamcast and the GameCube respectively. But with this announcement, it seemed like Resident Evil 4 was heading back to familiar Sony. Hideki Kamiya was also coming back to take the reins again, as he had previously directed Resident Evil 2. The original direction for this entry was to focus on the themes of cool and stylish for both the story and the aesthetic. As the development of Resident Evil 4 went on, though, things started to veer further and further from the Resident Evil series. Considering that this game starred an immortal being with supernatural powers, it wasn't exactly a good fit for the franchise. Shinji Mikami realized this, and eventually, the game was split off into its own franchise. This game would of course become Devil May Cry, but this meant that Resident Evil 4 had to restart development once again. The game would then take on 3 more forms and iterations, all of which were ultimately scrapped before the final playable version was decided upon. The Fog version, as it's commonly called, saw Leon infected with the progenitor virus and gain a power in his hand. The Hookman version saw Leon investigating a haunted building, fighting paranormal enemies like suits of armor, and being chased by a man with a meat hook. And the Hallucination version was really only a story concept, but centered around Leon infiltrating the Spencer Castle to look for answers about Umbrella. Significant work was done on some of these versions before scrapping the ideas entirely. And while some ideas from these early stages of development would survive into the final version, or even later pieces of the series, none of these were really the direction that Capcom was looking to go in. Eventually, after a very rocky development, Shinji Mikami decided to take over as director and involve himself in that role once again. He hadn't directed a Resident Evil game since the first, and had been involved in most of the projects in sort of a managerial role. Mikami was starting to grow a bit bored of this though, and decided that he wanted to flex his creative muscles once again. Part of the reason was also due to the fact that he felt like the series had hit a rut. In an interview with Game Informer from March 2004, he specifically said that he had played Resident Evil 0 and felt like it was much of the same. Mikami thought that the series needed a fresh start, that it needed to revolutionize things once again. Resident Evil as a series was responsible for popularizing the survival horror genre. Many things that it would create, mechanics, story, style, and atmosphere, were distinctly Resident Evil. But it was time to do that once more, to create a new version of what Resident Evil really means. This meant changing the style of the series entirely. The camera, the tone, the gameplay, everything was getting a new coat of paint. Some of the team weren't too happy with this change, and Mikami had to convince them over a long period of time. But Resident Evil 4 kind of had to perform really well. It had a lot of responsibility on its shoulders. Not only was the game looking to bring blockbuster sales back to the series, a period of declining sales in that of RE3, Code Veronica, and 0 had led them to realize they needed a massive hit. Not only this, but Resident Evil 4 was part of a massive initiative to revitalize the GameCube. The GameCube, when it released, wasn't a huge success. The console wasn't selling well, and because of this, Nintendo was looking for exclusives to convince people to use their platform. Capcom, in turn, announced the Capcom 5, 5 huge games that were going to be exclusive to the GameCube. Killer 7, directed by Suda51, PN03, directed by Shinji Mikami, Beautiful Joe, directed by Hideki Kamiya, Dead Phoenix, a game that was never completed or released, and Resident Evil 4. Resident Evil 4 was one of the last games in this series of projects to be released, hitting the market in 2005 along with Killer 7. But I make this point to note the stakes that were resting on Resident Evil 4's back, because I think this accurately sets up the context for development, why the game took so long to make compared to previous entries, and why the development restarted over and over again. The team, in particular Mikami, was looking for perfection with this entry. They were seeking that unattainable goal, a way to completely revitalize the Resident Evil franchise, for better or for worse. Resident Evil 4 was released on January 11th, 2005 in North America, January 27th, 2005 in Japan, and March 18th, 2005 in the PAL region, all for the Nintendo GameCube. Of course, Resident Evil 4 would quickly smash Capcom's expectations and sell far more than they ever thought it could. Because of this, the game wasn't long for the exclusivity of the GameCube, and by October of the same year, it had released on the PlayStation 2. It would be ported to Windows and the Wii in 2007, mobile in 2009, PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 in 2011, PlayStation 4 and Xbox One in 2016, and Nintendo Switch in 2019. And it even made its way to VR in 2021 with the release of the Oculus Quest version of the game. While the Resident Evil series is known for porting their games to other systems, Resident Evil 4 is easily the most prolific of the entire series, and these days you can play it on just about anything. For this video, I mostly played the PC version of the game, the version that's readily available on Steam. I also tried out the Wii version of the game because that was the version I played as a kid. I should also note that I will talk about the remake version of the game later in this video. For now, Resident Evil 4 begins with a recap from Leon Kennedy himself. The last time we saw Leon, he was getting captured by the US government, and they had taken Sherry Birkin captive to learn more about the virus. Leon talks about the outbreak that started in the Raccoon City trilogy. The president eventually ordered Raccoon City destroyed, and the place was nuked. Umbrella was outed as the culprits of the outbreak, and they were basically shut down. Their stock prices plummeted, and they were suspended from operating their business in the United States, which makes sense because they manufactured a virus that effectively killed millions of people and, by proxy, destroyed an entire city. You know? Resident Evil in this way, though, effectively begins a new trilogy of games, because we start this story off 6 years later. Umbrella, the main enemy of the franchise up to this point, has been wiped out. Leon has left the country on a mission for the US government to rescue the daughter of the president, who has been taken captive and is being held somewhere in rural Spain.
I received special training via a secret organization working under the direct control of the president. I was to assume the responsibility of protecting the new president's family.
Leon is currently being transported by 2 police officers who have a lot of questions and a sort of foreboding perspective on what Leon is about to get himself into.
You are a long way from home, cowboy. You have my sympathies.
Guess that's a local's way of breaking the ice. Anyway, you know what this is all about. My assignment is to search for the president's missing daughter.
What? All by yourself?
I'm sure you boys didn't just tag along so we could sing Kumbaya together at some Boy Scout bonfire.
These two schlubs won't help us out much and will pretty quickly become worm food anyways. But when the car stops outside of the village and one of the officers heads to drain the snake, Leon thinks about the details of the case.
It was right before I was to take on my duties of protecting the president's daughter when she was abducted. That's the ultimate reason I'm in this lonely and rural part of Europe. According to our intelligence, there's reliable information about a sighting of a girl that looks very similar to the president's daughter. Apparently, she's being withheld by some unidentified group of people.
Leon doesn't seem interested in the job overall, even expressing boredom at the case he's been given. The officers only take him so far, and Leon heads off into the village on his own. As he exits the vehicle, he gets a call from Hunnigan, a U.S. federal agent that will be our main point of contact on this mission. We carry out conversations with her through these codec call-like interface screens. I thought these were pretty cool, and they definitely gave me slight Metal Gear Solid vibes every time they popped up. She introduces herself to Leon, and she tells us the name of the girl we're trying to find, Ashley Graham. We head down a rural path into the village and we find a lone house where Leon investigates the inside. He finds a man stoking his fire, but the man doesn't answer any of our questions about the missing girl. He eventually responds in Spanish and another language Leon knows too well, blind hostility. We are eventually forced to shoot the man as he attacks with an axe. Just after this confrontation, the snarky Spanish policemen are killed as someone drives them off a nearby cliff. We're being surrounded, so we have to dive out of the second floor window to get away, but more villagers attack outside as well. Since we're dealing with combat and exploration, it's probably a good time to talk about gameplay. Resident Evil 4, as I've touched upon before, drastically changes the state of the Resident Evil series. While the previous games in the series were survival horror games that mostly used fixed camera angles, Resident Evil 4 favors a third-person camera. This means that this game also features full 3D environments, and while Code Veronica pulled this off first, Resident Evil 4 goes all the way. No more small rooms, we now have larger open maps to traverse with full buildings that we can enter and exit. And while Resident Evil 4 wasn't the first game to do a third-person over-the-shoulder camera, it definitely popularized this style, to the point that many games would try to copy its success after its release. We don't have full control over the camera though. The camera will follow our character and turn along with us, but if we want to look up and down, we have to use the right stick, which snaps back to the character once we let go. In combat, we still stand in one place and aim at enemies to shoot them. Just like the previous Resident Evil games, we can't move while we're aiming, meaning that aiming and attacking leaves us vulnerable to other attacks from enemies. When aiming with any of our various weapons, we can use a red dot sight to see where our shot is going to land. Resident Evil 4 also has a dynamic damage system, just like the games before it. If we shoot towards the head of an enemy, they might be stunned and take more damage. If we shoot at their legs, they might fall down. Of course, in the fixed camera games of the past, we only had the option to aim up, down, or in the middle, and now we have an entire other dimension to think about. We've shed the constraints of one axis and gained another. Just like other Resident Evil games, we have a knife that we can use as well, one that's very advantageous in most forms of combat. Instead of having to equip it separately though, it's always equipped. We can use the left trigger to bring it out and make swipes at the enemy with it. It's extremely useful when an enemy is downed and not dead, to bring out the knife and start hacking away before they get up, saving us precious ammo and valuable resources. But what Resident Evil 4 does carry over from its predecessors is its focus on resource restriction and inventory management. In previous Resident Evil games, we had a limited inventory, one that might be upgraded once or twice in each game, but that was generally pretty static at just a few slots. Most items took up one slot in our inventory, but larger items could take up two. In Resident Evil 4, we have a larger attaché case, and items can take anywhere from 1 slot to 8 or 12. And on top of that, the attaché case is laid out in a grid system, with each item taking up a certain amount of squares on that grid. We can change the placement of these items and the rotation of those items to make them fit better with others. The inventory management system serves as sort of a puzzle of its own to make as many items fit in this case as possible. It's not exactly the hardest puzzle in the world, but it ends up being its own little mini game. We need to fit as many items as we can in our inventory because resources are restricted, just like in the previous games. This is where the series has always pulled its horror, fear, and tension from. Restricting the amount of ammunition or healing items that the player has makes the player more fearful of upcoming encounters. It also changes the way that the same player decides to approach those encounters. It's a fundamental psychology change in the mind of the player. But even though these resources are still important, Resident Evil 4 gives us a bit more leeway in that department. Enemies that we kill will drop ammunition or healing items. The items that the enemies drop will be based on what we currently have in our inventory. If we're really low on healing items, the game will tend to give us more. If we're low on a certain type of ammunition, the game will try to give us more. This dynamic system adjusts to how you play. If you use more shotgun ammo, the game will give you more of that ammo. This effectively allows the player to choose how they'd like to approach combat. Of course, we can't just favor one weapon because we will eventually run out of that ammo and be forced to swap to another one. But this system works really smoothly to remove any sort of chance that we might get soft-locked. This was pretty easy to do in previous Resident Evil games depending on how much ammo you used. But in Resident Evil 4, it's almost impossible to put yourself in a situation that you can't get out of, or at least it was for me. Resident Evil 4 also gives us a variety of different weapons to fight off our upcoming enemies with. Across the course of the game, we'll get shotguns, submachine guns, pistols, a rocket launcher, the list goes on. There's not that much that we haven't seen in the series before, but it's how Resident Evil 4 decides to use these weapons that makes the game truly special. First of all, the weapons all feel distinct and great to use. Shooting is fantastic, and each weapon has an appropriate weight to it when being fired. The rifle feels like it kicks back. The shotgun does as well, but the pistol stays steady when firing clean consecutive shots. The shotgun also feels like a bigger commitment due to the amount of time that it takes to reload. But all of these things can be changed and fixed as the time goes on. I talked about in previous videos how the first Resident Evil game had an inventory management system that was sort of like a trading system. You were effectively trading with the game. When you kill an enemy, you are trading ammunition to get something from that enemy. Access to a different area that might have items, a key item itself, or safety. These trades are what make up the bulk of the gameplay, and Resident Evil 1 is us effectively making good or bad trades to a video game. Resident Evil 4 shirks the illusion put in front of a trading system and literally introduces a merchant character that we'll meet later who will trade with us and allow us to buy items. The first thing that we can do with the merchant is sell items to him. These can be any sort of items that we find out in the world. These are often treasures and gems and various goods that might be of some value to him. The treasure system is also surprisingly in-depth. Certain treasures have slots inside of them that we can place gems in. These increase their value based on the gems that we choose to place in the slots. This means that, for example, a treasure that has a ruby in it will fetch a higher price than that same treasure and the ruby sold separately. This is a beautiful system because what often happens is that we find some gems and don't yet have anything to place them in, or vice versa. When we come across a merchant, though, we are later rewarded if we manage to keep those treasures for now and wait for a better place to sell them. We are rewarded for waiting longer and putting off the rewards that we get. Of course, the game could put us in a situation where we feel we need to sell the treasures before getting a better price for them, but that's a choice that the player is allowed to make. The player is rewarded for waiting, a delayed gratification instead of instant rewards. And we can really sell anything that we want to the merchant: treasures, weapons, ammunition, and even healing items. If our inventory is full and we need to make some space, we can sell it to the merchant and get some money for it. This is sort of required because Resident Evil 4 does away entirely with item boxes. There is no box where we can store weapons we aren't using, items that we don't have space for. But unlike Resident Evil 0, the game actually changes its systems and balances things around getting rid of the item box, so it works very well. This is because the attaché case can be upgraded by the merchant as the game goes on. It costs quite a bit of money, but the merchant can give us extra space to store more items or more weapons, meaning that this tiny briefcase Leon carries around will eventually be able to store an arsenal that would rival that of entire countries. Okay, not literally that much, but it's a lot. Speaking of attaché case upgrades, we can buy items from the merchant as well. We gain currency through selling items, but also by picking up currency, referred to as pesetas, a common form of Spanish currency around the world. These coins can be used to purchase items from the merchant, basic items like first aid sprays, new weapons, or even oddities like treasure maps that will show us where the secrets are in the game. Getting new weapons and new firepower from the merchant is essential to upgrading our combat ability throughout the game. Enemies will grow stronger and more versatile as the game goes on, so we will need to adapt and change what we can do in terms of combat. On top of that, the merchant can also tune up the items that we already have. We can upgrade the firepower of each weapon, the reload speed, capacity, etc. This is also incredibly important because a fully upgraded weapon makes a huge difference when compared to a fresh one. It will make or break how quick it is to kill an enemy, and in later stages when bosses or enemies can become bullet sponges, we'll need the speed, ammo, and damage to be able to take them out with efficiency. The entire merchant system works together with the new combat system because Resident Evil 4 has definitively made a switch in its gameplay style. Not only do we shoot and knife enemies just like we did before, but we can also roundhouse kick enemies and take them to Suplex City, bitch.
Suplex City, bitch.
Being able to do these things doesn't ultimately change that much in terms of gameplay. It does change how we approach combat situations, just like everything else. If we stun an enemy, our response is no longer to turn them into Swiss cheese with our bullets, but to rush them and deliver a stunning roundhouse kick to their head. It encourages less of a trepidatious approach and a slightly more aggressive one. Of course, enemies are still powerful, so we can be overwhelmed, but we save ammunition by using Leon's professional wrestling style rather than his bullets. But it's the implication of these moves and how they're used that change the tone of the game. We've never really seen a character do things like this outside of Wesker, who was given powers due to his T-virus injection. So it's one of many things that will shift the perception of this game in the series. The game takes the series from plotting terror and horror to hardcore non-stop action. Again, that doesn't mean that horror isn't here, and that this game won't be scary. It just means that the game will weave action into that story much more than before. It's also worth noting that this won't be the first time the Resident Evil series has shifted in this direction. Resident Evil 2 had a slightly more action-focused style, and so did Resident Evil 3. But the largest thing that should be noted about Resident Evil 4's systems is just how well they all work together, how the entire package feels when you play it, just how damn well it works. It's a bit harder to explain than the systems themselves because it's subjective, but Resident Evil 4 just feels so good to play. It is such a fun game, and as soon as you roll credits on it for the first time, you've realized more about how the game works, how you can manipulate it to your advantage, and you're ready for round 2. Of course, Resident Evil games have always been replayable, but I've never wanted to replay a game as quickly as I have Resident Evil 4. It's already one of the longest games in the series so far, and I just wanted to do it again right away. I think part of this comes from just how much control Resident Evil 4 gives the player. The world has been expanded, and we've been introduced to a much larger area than we've seen before in this series. An area that we can fully explore, for better or for worse, no longer confined to the square boundaries of the pre-rendered backgrounds. We can aim our weapons in this 3D space. We can choose how we want to play, letting the dynamic system provide for us like a merciful god. We can choose what to sell and keep. We can choose how we want to fight, what we want to upgrade, where our focus will lie. It's this level of player choice and control that allows Resident Evil 4 to be an incredibly proficient shooter. And we'll talk about how Resident Evil 4 excels with its story, tone, and its horror. But Resident Evil 4 gives the player the chance to make the decisions, extending on and perfecting everything that the previous games in the series did. And while Resident Evil 4, in some ways, feels like it does everything different, it really just takes all the systems that we've seen before and fine-tunes them. We get a game that is seeking perfection. All that adjustment piles up, and what we get feels like something pretty brand new. But it's the culmination of a lot of decisions that give us the final product we see here. Because at the end of the day, Resident Evil 4 capitalizes on everything. It takes all of the things from previous games, retools them, and provides new ways to engage with each of these systems. You can see everything that Resident Evil 4 would do all the way back in Resident Evil 1 and 2 and even 3. It's all there, it's just being used in a different way. And I haven't even mentioned the fact that the new combat system is just very intense. In the first few Resident Evil games, though enemy encounters could heighten the tension of any given situation, these encounters were fairly binary. We generally stand, aim, shoot, and if we run out of ammo, reload through the menu and continue firing, maybe dodging some attacks here and there. But Resident Evil 4 removes our ability to reload weapons through the menu. This means that as we're reloading, we need to run away, and because areas are so large, we're once again presented with a choice. Where do we run to? If we run somewhere in the heat of the moment that causes our back to be pressed up against a wall, then we find ourselves standing firm once again and using every piece of ammunition that we can to get out of this. But if we run somewhere more open, we might have a bit more freedom and room to breathe. Enemies are strong and often attack in groups, which makes things difficult for us. But every encounter, just like the first few games, is always a few bad moves away from putting us in a terrible spot. We could easily get attacked a few times and lose most of our healing items. We could easily miss a few shots and lose a lot of our ammo, and suddenly we aren't as comfortable as before. The whole combat system just genuinely makes every encounter feel intense and fun. It's heavy action, it's fast-paced, it requires a level of engagement from the player. This engagement turns into feedback once we complete the encounter, a true satisfaction that we get from completing an encounter unscathed, and a new fear going into the next one that this won't last. As Leon gets away from the hostile locals and takes them out, he heads into the village proper since we're still on the outskirts for now. We can find a dog nearby who has found himself caught in a bear trap. We can help this dog out, and in return, he will assist us later in the game. As we head down the path that curves through the woods, we'll be attacked again by some of the locals, and we eventually come across the village square. Leon sees a horrific sight here, that the people in this town have taken one of the policemen that drove us here and have burned his impaled body in the center of this homestead. We then move into the town where, once again, the locals attack. This is our first large combat encounter, and for now, we're mainly just dealing with the Ganados. These are the local villagers that seem to be very angry at Leon for some reason. The Ganados aren't too difficult to deal with. They will rush at us with varying ferocity. Some will charge at Leon, trying to grab his neck and squeeze the life out of him. Others will wield farming equipment to run Leon through with forked steel. Others will throw flaming torches. Some will toss lit dynamite or axes at our head. The sheer variety of enemies here is just overwhelming. We get used to them pretty quickly, and the game manages to shake things up in the first few chapters, but the Ganados themselves are essentially the zombies of this entry. Though this was one of the largest changes to the series, that these are definitively not zombies. The Ganados are not undead, they are actually being controlled by a genetically engineered parasite, something we'll get into more later in this video. They behave similar to zombies, unending aggression towards anyone alive and fully human, but they can wield weapons and seem to possess a higher intelligence over the average Raccoon City beast. The Ganados, while it seems like a small thing, are an incredibly impressive thematic change for the series. Resident Evil 4 finds a way to break the mold of zombie game while also still sort of being a zombie game. Resident Evil found itself in a place where it was trapped under the zombie game label, but the Ganados are a sort of evolution of the zombie as a fodder enemy, something a bit stronger, a bit more capable, and it was always right there. Resident Evil doesn't need to literally feature zombies just because the first few entries did. Umbrella was manufacturing all sorts of BOWs, so it only makes sense that in this world, it is capable of creating other beasts of horror as well, ones that can retain something slightly human. It's just such an impressive way to change the series' focus while also keeping things in line with the world that its creators have set up. As we take out the Ganados attacking us, Leon is eventually also assailed by Dr. Salvador, more commonly referred to as the Chainsaw Man. This is a more rare enemy type in the game, but one that is much stronger than the Ganados. He obviously wields a chainsaw and can take Leon's head off in one swipe. This is probably also the point in the game where you'll be introduced to the brutality and gory kills of Resident Evil 4. When Leon dies in the game, he doesn't just lay back to be feasted upon by the enemy. He suffers a horrific death at the hands of whatever is attacking him, getting his head cut off with a chainsaw, being run through with a pitchfork. If you aren't good at this game, virtual Leon will die 1,000 horrible deaths in this hell world simulation you're running on your PC. And this is nothing new to the series. These glory kills have been around since even Resident Evil 1, when the hunters would decapitate those that stood in the way of their jump attack. But now, in full 3D, they're a little bit more real, and a lot more brutal. I think it adds something distinct to this entry that makes it stand out from the rest. Pairing these kill cams with the muted brown tones of the world brings this entry down to earth. It makes it feel like the stakes have been heightened. The game definitely starts out a lot less fantastical. We don't know what's going on with the villagers, because for all intents and purposes, they're just regular townsfolk that have gone crazy. Effectively, at this point, Leon is just being attacked by other people, and as we're defending this onslaught of villagers, the bell at the nearby church rings. This seems to distract all the attackers, and they head into the church, seemingly under some sort of spell. We then get one of the coolest title card reveals I've seen in a video game.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
Leon checks in with Hunnigan once again, and she gives him directions to get out of this place. We need to take a trail nearby. Before we leave this village, though, since there are no enemies around to bother us, we can search the nearby buildings and scavenge for any loose healing items or ammunition. This is probably one of the largest parts of Resident Evil 4's gameplay outside of combat: exploration. We are rewarded in this game by searching every nook and cranny, every room, every crevice, not only with treasure that can be sold to the merchant, but with ammo and other items that can be used in combat. And exploration is always very satisfying. Realizing that you've missed something and can't go back always feels like a shot in the gut. There's a compulsion to complete everything in this game, to find every item, because it makes a massive difference. Exploration is preparation, because if we go into a battle without exploring the area before, we are at a significant disadvantage compared to otherwise. It's a very important part of the game, but it also gets us to engage further with the environment. We start this game out in the village, which is what the larger area is referred to here. There are 3 total generalized sections of Resident Evil 4: the village, the castle, and the island. The village is distinct because we are outdoors in this rural Spanish town. Even if the first few Resident Evil games were horror-themed, they were very colorful. Color was always very present, and those colors popped out from the environment. Resident Evil 4 once again shirks the traditions of the series by making this environment entirely brown. Muted colors abound as we weave through forests of dead trees and seemingly infertile soil. If everything is dead around us, then where does a man like Leon fit in? He doesn't. He's an outsider here, a foreign agent mixing in with the local natives and fauna. Leon is physically repelled as an outsider. Hostility will meet him from around every corner because he doesn't belong here. And that is expressed through the environment's design. It also lends itself toward the unfamiliar, because we aren't used to this style in the series. Outside of maybe the first remake and Resident Evil 0, we are unfamiliar with this aesthetic and tone. This sets us up for tension and fear. Not to mention the fact that Spain is pretty far out of Leon's depth, as only 6 years ago he was a Raccoon City police officer newly hired. Now he's trudging through a foreign world, a place entirely unfamiliar to him, with monsters he's never seen before. Heading through the village, we can find a note to the townsfolk. They had ordered the president's daughter transferred away, as they were aware that an American agent, Leon, had been sent to retrieve her. They also theorized that a third party could be involved, but they keep that party a mystery for now. We can find a farm nearby that holds some blue medallions that we can shoot for the merchant. The merchant will give us a new pistol if we do so. This is just a small optional side quest, and these were far expanded upon in the remake. As we head down the hill, we can find another collection of houses where we locate a prisoner inside. It's not the president's daughter, but a man named Luis Serra.
Little rough, don't you think? You're not like them?
No. You?
Okay, I have only one very important question. You got a smoke?
Luis is a snarky, sarcastic sort of rapscallion. He's quick-witted and always has something to say, even in the face of death. And after we find him, Leon is immediately attacked by a large man that Sarah calls the Big Cheese. This man is actually Mendez, the local chief of the village. Leon is incapacitated and seems to have been injected with something while he was out. When he wakes up, he and Sarah are tied to a chair. Luis Serra already seems to know about Ashley, the president's daughter. He heard that she was being kept in the church. Luis tells Leon that he used to be a cop, but he quit because he was sick of putting his life on the line. A ganado interrupts their conversation, though, and the two manage to get away unscathed. Luis runs away, and Leon tells Hunnigan that he's heading back to the village. We can then backtrack through the forests, since we were carried away after being attacked by the chief. We end up finding the same chief's manor in the hills. Here we can find an insignia key that will get us inside the secret passage in the village that all the ganados wandered into. Through notes, we can find out that the villagers seem to be serving someone named Lord Sadler. The chief himself was ordered to capture Leon, but to keep him alive, something that the chief protested. As we head out of this room, the chief himself shows up and chokes Leon. He lets him go and tells him that he carries the same blood as them, possibly referring to the injection Leon was given earlier. He also makes sure to remind Leon of what he already knew, that he is an outsider.
You carry the same blood as us, it seems. Nevertheless, you're an outsider.
Hunnigan calls us and tells Leon that a religious cult by the name of the Los Illuminados are involved in this whole thing. We can then head back to the village and use the secret passage to get to the church. But of course, it isn't as easy as just waltzing inside. We need to get a specific crest that will fit in the door. Heading down a nearby path, Leon sees the villagers dumping one of the cops' bodies in the water. He takes a boat across the lake and is attacked by a giant fish monster called Del Lago. This is our first boss battle of the game, and in terms of boss battles, it's a relatively easy one. Our boat quickly gets caught on the beast as it pulls us around the lake. We have to avoid obstacles in the water and use our harpoons to attack it. Del Lago will eventually try to swim at the boat, and if we get hit at all, then we have to swim back by completing a QTE. If we manage to spear enough harpoons into the thing's back, though, it eventually dies. But sinking into the water, it almost takes Leon down with it, before he cuts himself free of the binds. Once Leon reaches land, he coughs blood into his hand and passes out in a nearby shack. We can see the infection coursing through his body as he wakes up, but this turns out just to be a bad dream. Hey, maybe Leon just came down with a nasty cold. He passed out for 6 hours, and Hunnigan clearly thinks that this must be connected to the blood comment the village chief made to Leon, but he just brushes it off.
Maybe that has some connection to what the village chief was talking about.
Can't say.
He is a professional after all, and there's work to be done. This actually begins Chapter 2 of the game. While the remake would introduce distinct chapters that broke up the game into sections, the original game was split into 5 total chapters and smaller subsections within those. Upon completing each subsection, you'll be given some chapter completion stats and the opportunity to save, as well as these blown out, really stylized images for the intermission screens. Once we regain control, Leon finds an anonymous note nearby. It tells him to search the nearby waterfall for an item that might get us into the church. We're also given a warning that an El Gigante is being weaponized by the locals. And as we leave this building, it's nighttime now, and things have changed. The first ganado that we see bursts its head, and out comes a writhing parasite called the Las Plagas. A completely new threat has been introduced, and the ganados have effectively leveled up. When these parasites spawn from the ganado's body, they take a lot more hits to kill, and the wriggling tendrils can whip around to attack us. They're far more damaging and far more dangerous. The amount of ganados that change into Las Plagas are seemingly random though. Some will and some won't. It seems like shooting them in the head increases their chances to change, so using the knife or body shots from here on out is a bit more sensible. But this change, much like the introduction of the Hunter in Resident Evil 1, or the pouring in of the undead in Resident Evil 2, or the threat of safe room interference in Resident Evil 3, massively adjusts the stakes. The ganados are no longer just fodder for our pistol. In an instant, a fight that we thought wasn't that difficult or dangerous can turn into a threatening ordeal. And if there was one consistent theme throughout the series that these games have always done well, it's setting a status quo at the beginning and then shattering that status quo at a later time. The status quo in Resident Evil 4 was that the ganados were basically the undead of this entry, though maybe a bit stronger. By this point, we've probably gotten used to fighting them just a bit, but now all that has changed, and we've grown uncomfortable once again. This series, if anything, is a master at keeping you in an uncomfortable zone, never letting you get your bearings, and always keeping you on your toes. With that new threat properly assessed, Leon trudges through the waterfall and manages to grab the insignia that he needs. We can then take a boat back to the merchant and start heading back towards the church. But this isn't just any bland backtracking section, we have another boss battle. We finally get to see what that note meant by the villagers having some strange weapon in their arsenal, because we're about to go up against the El Gigante. This is our second boss of the game, and it's definitely a David versus Goliath ordeal. This 50-foot beast will stalk us around the arena and try to squash us, grab us, stomp us, any of the primordial movements that you would use to squash a bug. Of course, we dodge these and can do enough damage to reveal the parasite inside of this thing. We can target it, but we can also stun the monster and crawl onto its back to deliver slicing blows to the thing trying to escape its skin. I love the design of this boss, mostly because it's just a big dude, and it's all very simple. It's not a mechanically complex fight, but there's a lot of ways that we can go about it. It's also a terrifying monster to go up against, and probably one of the most iconic bosses in this game. You may have never played Resident Evil 4, but you've definitely seen a picture of El Gigante at one point or another. And it's in part to just how well the enemy itself is designed. It's got a striking look, especially with the massive parasite coming out of its back, and it probably helped that it looked like the cave troll from the Fellowship of the Ring. Also, if we help the dog out earlier, then he'll come back during this fight to assist us in taking down El Gigante. Once we finally take him down, we can head back to the church and solve a small puzzle to get inside of a side room where Ashley is being held. Ashley immediately lashes out at Leon, mistaking him for one of her captors. Once he invokes the name of the president, though, she goes with him willingly. Hunnigan has a chopper ready to go to exfiltrate us from this hellish landscape, but as the two try to escape the church, they're interrupted by Sadler. He introduces himself to us and states his goal. He wants to stick it to the United States, to show them that they don't control the world.
No longer will the United States think they can police the world forever. So, we kidnapped the president's daughter in order to give her our power, and then send her back.
No.
They injected Ashley with whatever power they have and plan to send her back to the US. This is the same injection that Leon was given when he passed out. When the parasite inside them hatches, they'll be at the will of the Los Illuminados. The two make their escape through the window, and we have to make our way through the hordes standing outside. Heading back into the main part of the village, the two are diverted to a lone house standing in a field. Unfortunately, the chopper isn't arriving anytime soon, as home base has lost contact with it. We still need to head to the extraction point and get to the new chopper, but for now, the goal is to survive. Another horde of Ganados are swarming in on Leon and Ashley, and the two manage to take refuge in the lone home, where they find Luis. He, of course, makes a pass at Ashley immediately.
Small world, eh? Well, I see that the president's equipped his daughter with ballistics, too.
How rude!
Hey, he did say he was a ladies' man. Luis and Leon team up to protect the house, and we have this awesome defense sequence where we kill tons of Ganados that swarm in through the windows. We can bar the entry points briefly with bookcases and furniture, but they'll eventually get through. The villagers even end up coming in through the second floor as they quickly use ladders to enter the higher windows. This whole sequence is just so much fun, and as soon as we learn how satisfying it is to headshot one of the Ganados, we yearn for the time when we'll get some value out of our weaponry by slicing down huge groups of them. So this sequence feels like a fan service of satisfaction, as we're just allowed to go guns blazing and take out all of them. After defending the house for long enough, the horde backs off. Luis immediately leaves because he forgot something, and Leon and Ashley must trudge through the forest in a different direction, since the bridge they took to get here is out. One of Resident Evil 4's greatest strengths is its pacing. The game never really stops, and it's always able to keep the plot, the gameplay, and the environment moving forward. We're always pushing on, and even in the moments where we might have to backtrack, the game never lets the places we've already been stay the same for long. Even when we started backtracking to the church before, we were immediately given the gameplay change of the Las Plagas, and soon after, we were given the El Gigante to keep things fresh. The game feels like it's terrified of you ever feeling like you've done the same thing twice, and Resident Evil 4 succeeds in that area because the whole game feels fresh. These areas never get stale, and the game always finds a way to increase that pace or those stakes. I should also note, gameplay has wildly changed since Ashley has joined our little survival party. Since our whole goal here was to save Ashley, we need to protect her at all costs while she follows us around. This means that she can take damage while we're fighting enemies. She can get carried away by enemies trying to recapture her, and she can end up standing in front of Leon and getting killed. Now, it's not exactly a hot take, but I hate escort missions in video games. Who doesn't? It's just annoying to know that you're going to have this other character that you have to keep safe, one that might not be able to properly take care of themselves on a battlefield. Depending on how it's implemented, it could be very cumbersome or go really smooth. I usually dread these types of sections in a game because I know that it could represent a tiresome chunk of something that was going really well. Well, I should not have dreaded Ashley's implementation in Resident Evil 4 because it's fantastic. I very rarely accidentally killed Ashley in battle because she was always ducking out of the way of my shots. When you aim towards her, she'll crouch to avoid getting hit, and once I figured this out, I adjusted my shots accordingly. She can also get carried away, at which point you'll have to shoot the person carrying her so that she'll be dropped. Again, this is just as simple as targeting a different enemy, and because Ashley tries to avoid damage, she's not just getting hit all the time, and she's not incredibly easy to kill. Of course, we heal her just like we would Leon with various herbs and combinations, but Ashley never felt like a burden on my playthrough. She fit in very well with the game, to the point that at times, when I would rescue her, I wasn't worried about the sections to come. On top of that, we can order Ashley to hide while we're fighting, to keep her even more out of the way. But this all goes so well simply because of how intelligent the AI for Ashley is. It constantly reacts to your moves to make sure that she isn't a burden on Leon. She should be an added challenge, an added worry, but not an overall burden. This is in contrast to a lot of escort missions in games that design their escorted characters as functionally incompetent pieces of drywall, characters that don't react to the player or the world in the way that they should. I feel like escort characters can often feel like a burden in games because they represent something that is getting in the way of you having a good time. And while Resident Evil 4 can be scary, a lot of it is you having a damn good time facing the challenges that the game throws at you. Its gameplay is so satisfying that you constantly want more encounters and bosses, a glutton that just can't get enough Resident Evil 4. So a character that joins us only to slow us down, get in the way, and make life harder should represent a shift to that dynamic. And it would have been easy to make that deliberate choice, because disrupting the fun that we're having would put more pressure on the player and lean on the intensity of the game. But Resident Evil 4 never feels like it makes that choice, because it isn't here to harm us, but to show us a good time. And when games don't put extra attention into this, it creates a bad relationship between the player and the character that is being escorted. People suddenly hate that character, and Resident Evil 4 wouldn't work nearly as well if everyone just hated Ashley. We will have to guide Ashley through a lot of Resident Evil 4. A large portion of the game is just an escort mission, but the game never actually feels like it is. And if Resident Evil 4 is an escort mission, then it is the best damn escort mission I've ever played, aside from Death Stranding. Leaving the house behind, Leon and Ashley will have to head through one of two paths. A note nearby explains that one path contains an El Gigante and the other some Ganados. This is a choice given to the player, but I would imagine most choose the non-El Gigante path since we literally just fought one and probably don't want to do it again right away. Also, heading down this path allows us to fight a new mini-boss, in that of the Bella sisters. These are two sisters, bindings around their face, wielding chainsaws, and of course they crave decapitation, specifically Leon's head being separated from his body. They're not a huge threat and not really that different from the Dr. Salvador enemies that we fought earlier, though coupled with the fact that there's a horde of Ganados pecking at us as well, it can be a difficult time. Even if this boss fight is a little disappointing though, it won't be for long, because another one is right around the corner. We can find a note alerting us of an upcoming ambush, but Leon and Ashley have to head to this building anyways, because they need a way through the next door to our new area. Here, they are in fact ambushed by the chief himself. He's finally decided to take Leon out, but Leon manages to take him out first.
Hasta luego.
This unfortunately does nothing to the parasite-infected man, who only transforms into an even stronger beast. We can fight Mendez and blast him full of holes in this burning warehouse, but he gets separated from his own legs and uses his new parasite appendages to swing around on the crossbeams above him. We then have to keep our distance from him and try to shoot his swinging body as it follows us across the building. I just love this fight so much. I love the way it changes and develops as the fight goes on. I love the set piece of the burning warehouse. I love the design of Mendez. It's just so good. It also helps that they have been building up Mendez as a threat since the early stages of the game, and he definitely lives up to that threat. Mendez happens to drop his eye when he dies, which is good for us because the next door has a retinal scanner required to get through. Leon uses the eye to get through, and Ashley and he are chased up the next path. This leads them across a drawbridge, and their only option is to close themselves inside this new area, the castle, which also starts Chapter 3 of the game. The castle is very distinct when you compare it to the village, and it's probably my favorite area in the game. The two sections are at almost complete odds with each other. First of all, the village has this theme of being an outsider in a foreign land. The unruly wilds are at odds with us and Leon. It feels like the civilization is fighting back against us. Nature itself feels as if it repels and pushes against our presence. The wilds surround us. They take us in and they spit us out. The castle provides both a similar and opposite feeling. This place, too, will repel us and make us feel uncomfortable, but that's because it's man-made. The castle feels out of place in this modern world. We feel like it's from a different time, not a different location. Enemy appearances and weapons reinforce this feeling. Resident Evil 4 is masterfully crafted to make us feel like an outsider in every way possible. This is the thread of the game, and each area puts its own special spin on this idea. The castle is cold by nature. Drab stone wraps nearly every surface of the outside areas. The insides are decorated lavishly, but with paintings, artifacts, and rituals that we don't understand. The lack of comfort comes from the unfamiliar construction and furnishings rather than the fauna and culture. But the castle is an imposing structure, a massive labyrinth with traps and halls that twist and turn. It's probably the closest that Resident Evil 4 comes to feeling like a traditional Resident Evil game, but that mostly comes from the fact that we are indoors. Heading into the castle for the first time, we're met with heavy resistance from hooded men who not only attack us with flails and shields, but also use catapults to launch flaming balls of hellfire at us. We have to change our fighting style just a bit in the castle. Since the enemies sometimes use protection, we need to favor precision over quantity. Or you can just panic and start shooting the shield until it's destroyed like I did most of the time. Once we get into the castle proper by activating a cannon to destroy one of the doors, Leon updates Hunnigan on their new situation. But the communication with her is quickly cut off. No outside help for now. Deeper inside the castle, we find Luis. He determines that Leon and Ashley's infections have progressed too far. He needs to go back and get something, supposedly a cure for this virus, and leaves without elaboration. Once we finally get inside the building, we're greeted with the lavish and almost colorful interiors. But a new enemy is here to introduce himself. A small man greets us and says that his name is Ramon Salazar. Salazar is only 20 years old, but both looks 80 and 10 at the same time. He's clearly working with the Los Illuminados, as we can see the cult has wriggled its way in here as well. He wants Ashley. For some reason, the whole organization does, but Leon is just a pawn to them, so they'd like to quickly see him killed.
I've been expecting you, my brethren.
No thanks, bro.
Our way to Salazar is blocked, though, until we find some medallions that will fit in the door that he's raised. We can find a note nearby from the cult talking about the fact that they need to apprehend Luis. He stole one of their samples and their vaccines. They think he may be working with the mysterious third party who we will soon finally meet. After this, we fight a new boss called the Garador. More of a mini-boss, this tortured soul seems to be bound and chained by several different mechanisms. He's sort of like an iron Wolverine with long claws that swipe and scrape. He takes nearly no damage from the front, and we have to specifically target the parasite on his back. Further along, we get this awesome sequence where we're swarmed by enemies and we have to lower a stairway to a higher platform. We then have to send Ashley to activate some switches and raise platforms that we can travel across to get to the next area. I don't know why, but this sequence is just so iconic to me. It stands out in my mind even after all these years. Resident Evil 4 was one of the only games in the series that I had already played when I started this series of videos, but for some reason I still remember this sequence. Maybe it's the widening of the castle, this seemingly impossibly sized room. Maybe it's the moat of water that just seems otherworldly and unrealistic. Maybe it's the new enemy designs in this section and how they form shields like a phalanx around the attackers. It's equal parts intense, trying to kill enough of these guys that we have time to operate the crank, and terrifying as the attackers mutter words in a foreign tongue. It's also particularly intense to balance defeating the enemies that are trying to attack us, while also trying to keep Ashley from getting captured on the higher platform. After we enter the next room, we meet the merchant once again, but there's a strange blue door sitting beside him. This door will take us to the target practice area. There are 4 of these throughout the entire game, and these rooms will allow us to play a short game of target practice where we shoot Ganados and try to avoid Ashley. We get more points for headshots and better scores if we manage to hit all the targets. It's an incredibly fun little mini-game, one that shows that the team were confident in their shooting mechanics, so confident that they knew people would want to do more of it. The reward for completing these mini-games are, of course, more currency to spend at the merchant, but also these rows of bottle caps. These bottle caps are just little models that can be viewed from the pause menu. They're really cool little figures, and they even have little speakers that will play voice lines from the characters they're portraying.
Leon, now! Did you send out those invitations? I told you no more than 50 people!
I love games that give you optional things like this. It feels like games did away with 3D models as a reward years ago, but it feels like it gives the player a moment to appreciate the design of the character outside of actually playing the game. I'm not sure why developers stopped putting these kinds of things in games, but please bring them back. As we head towards the next section of the castle, Ashley is separated from us by the traps in the building. She manages to get caught in some restraints on a wall. Of course, we now need to save her. Leon gets a call from Hunnigan on his codec, but we quickly realize that the frequency has been taken over by Salazar. He warns us that they've let out some insects down in the sewer, a new enemy that we'll meet soon. These creepy, crawly bugs inhabit the dank tunnels underneath the castle. They have the power to turn invisible and blend into the environment, so we have to notice small shifts in our surroundings to point them out. It also helps that we hear their nasty crackling and try to shoot them before they sneak up on us. They're a pretty cool enemy, and they feel distinctly Resident Evil. In a game where we've mostly fought humans or humanoid creatures, it's nice to see something that feels like it was in a fixed camera Resident Evil game. Making our way through the sewers, we eventually arrive back in the main room where a strange ritual is taking place. Within the castle halls, we'll actually find a note that details a bit of Salazar's origin story. He is the 8th castellan of this castle, but his family originally took the rights and powers from the Los Illuminados, a religious group that had deep roots in this area. Salazar basically feels bad that they did this, so he found the Las Plagas, the parasite that they've used to infect all these people, and gave it to Lord Sadler, in the hopes that he could atone for his family's sins. He's taken on the burden of his entire family and plans to make good on the wrongs that they did. Through the castle, we fight more cult members and eventually find Salazar once again. He makes it clear that he is not infected with the parasite, that he controls the hordes at his disposal, not the other way around. He sets his goons on us once again, this time armed with rocket launchers, which they often use to blow themselves up accidentally. We eventually reach the garden where we meet a familiar face in that of Ada Wong. She's clearly the third party that Salazar and all the notes were talking about. Leon identifies pretty quickly that she's working for Wesker, though, and she escapes.
Bit of advice, try using knives next time. Works better for close encounters.
Based on a nearby note, she seems to be working with Louise as well, so maybe she isn't entirely bad. She had him retrieve a sample of the parasite before we even got here. The group wants to take her alive so that they can question her, and that means they don't need Louise anymore, so they order his death. This happens pretty quickly after we find this note, as Louise dies a half second after we see him again.
Leon! I got it!
Sadler kills him with his own parasite appendage. With his dying breath, Louise tells Leon that he was a researcher working for Sadler, but clearly they found out he was working for someone else. He manages to give Leon the vaccine that suppresses the parasite growth, but Sadler has already taken the sample.
Louis! Louis!
In this same room, we find Ashley being held. We can break her bindings and protect her from the onslaught coming through the doors so she can leave. When we do this, though, we're actually given control of Ashley for a short section. Ashley needs to make her way up to Leon, but she doesn't have any weapons or ammo. I love this little piece of the game, for one, because the series has always tried to incorporate other playable characters into the games. The sections where we play as Rebecca and Steve in Resident Evil 1 and Code Veronica respectively come to mind, but also it's about how this section fully pushes the horror and tension of Resident Evil 4 to the max. We've been playing Leon for the entire game up to this point. And let's be honest, Leon is a badass. He's a killing machine. He roundhouse kicks anyone who steps in his way. He blasts fools in the face. He smashes. He survives. He conquers. And you feel this when you're playing him. He's a destructive force that leaves bodies in his wake. But throughout the game, we've been protecting Ashley, a college girl that has no bearing on this world, no concept of parasites or rituals or what any of this even means. So when we suddenly play her halfway through the game, stripped of all the ammo, the preparation, the safety, we are exposed. Our inventory has become a shield for us throughout the game, a crutch to fall back on. If we make a bad move in combat and miss a few shots, that's okay, because I've been saving up ammo and I can just reload. If we get hit one too many times and we lose some health, that's fine because I have a red and green herb combo I've been meaning to use. That's our protection. And when we switch over to Ashley, that shield is gone, and we are vulnerable once again. Ashley can move through these areas of the castle and run from enemies, but she can also use nearby lanterns to burn them alive. We also have to contend with a hallway full of animated suits of armor that are trying to kill us. These generally just require a quick dodge QTE from Ashley to get away. Towards the end of this section, we can find a note from the butler that was working for the Salazar family. He believes that Salazar was tricked into siding with Lord Sadler because his family was the one that sealed the Plagas away in the beginning. But despite that, the butler feels that Salazar is too far gone since he has already accepted the parasite in his body. Ashley then meets back up with Leon in a sweet reunion. Leon then gets a call from Salazar in a really weird, almost fourth wall breaking moment.
Why don't you do us all a favor and leave before the audience gets pissed off?
You're nothing but an extra in my script, so don't get too carried away.
We then move on to fight some animated suits of armor ourselves, almost get trapped with a spike ceiling, and snipe some stone dragons in the lava room. Come on, it's a castle. It has to have a lava room. This all allows us to eventually take a transport cart back to the start of the castle, where we can insert the medallions that we've been picking up along the way. Heading further through the castle, Ashley is captured once again, but not by hooded members of the cult, but by the Novistador insects. This room is where their nest of sorts is, or at least one of them, a massive column hanging from the ceiling where these creatures spawn. This is a signifier of what's to come, because we'll soon head underground to contend with many of these beasts. For now, Leon takes down cult members organized in a nearby clock tower. We are finally face to face with Salazar again, and he's keeping Ashley captive. Salazar catches Leon in his trap, but of course, the man is too badass to go out like that. Underground in the sewers, we're met with a new threat, the Verdugo. This monster is one of two that Salazar keeps at his side, cloaked in red robes. These two creatures are actually Salazar's mutated servants, one of them being the butler that wrote the note from earlier. The Verdugo, though, is a Plagas-controlled mutation, one that's covered in a metallic-like skin. This means that our normal shots don't do damage to it. We have to freeze the beast before we can hurt it. Down in the sewers, there are a few canisters that we can knock over to do just this. We also have the option of avoiding this enemy entirely by just waiting for the approaching elevator to arrive, but it takes so long that we might as well do something while we're waiting. In all seriousness, this is a pretty intense encounter. When we first meet the Verdugo, we are in a very small room, and its attacks can be evaded, but only with quick reflexes and accurate QTE presses. There just isn't enough room to even breathe in here, and the hallways don't provide much more freedom. This is by design, though. This is supposed to be a long, claustrophobic encounter, and on that, it delivers. After we take this elevator out, we see a scene of Sadler giving some mysterious man new orders. He wants this man, named Krauser, to go get Ashley and kill Leon since Salazar seems to have failed. We'll then head through the mines and have to fight technically another boss in that of two Gigantes at the same time. It's really not that much to write home about. The only difference is that we can activate this large hole in the center to burn the Gigantes if we want to. A few caves full of bugs and puzzles later, we can find a note from Ada signed with a kiss. She tells Leon that the Plagas can be safely removed if it hasn't hatched yet, but if it has, then it requires a risky operation to get it out. Ashley's time is ticking since she was injected before Leon was. Leon will make his way out of the underground and then head right back underground again into some ruins where we're once again fighting Ganados. We have to hop onto a minecart and follow the tracks while taking out enemies, avoiding obstacles in our way, and successfully pulling off QTEs. I love this section because it's really just high stakes action in the best way possible. We're jumping from minecart to minecart, trying to prevent enemies from jumping on, juggling multiple threats at once. It's so good, but also it was the first time that I really started to become annoyed with probably the only thing I'll complain about with this game, and that's the QTEs. Now, I won't say that I hate the QTEs in Resident Evil 4, because there's a lot to love about them. First of all, the fast-paced aesthetic, the UI for the buttons, everything about the way these QTEs look are great. They're super eccentric and over the top, and that's probably the best part, their style. But their implementation is just a bit too rigid. There is a QTE at the end of this mine section that requires you to jump from the cart and climb up on the other side of the track. If you miss this QTE, you start all the way back from the beginning of the mine section, which is just a huge pain. Obviously, there wasn't as much quality of life in games back then, so the thought to just have the player reload before the QTE wasn't there. But still, these QTEs are just far too rigid throughout the whole game. And with unskippable cutscenes, that means we'll often be rehearing dialogue over and over just to get another shot at this QuickTime event. It can be kind of annoying, and I wish they weren't as frequent as they are here. Whew, now that that's out of the way, I can continue freely praising Resident Evil 4 for the rest of this video. After we escape the mines, Leon finds himself climbing a massive statue of Salazar, jumping across its elevator hands to get to various switches in the room. Once we try to leave, though, the entire statue starts chasing after us, and we have to make a dash for the next tower. We once again come face to face with Salazar. He plans to complete a ritual to finish Ashley's transformation, and of course, we're going to stop it. We climb a huge tower as plenty of cult members try to prevent our ascent. At the top, we see that Salazar has already sent Ashley to another island, and he's going to complete his ritual to assimilate with this massive beast in front of us. Once he does this, we have our next proper boss fight against the mutated Salazar. We stand on a higher platform and try to shoot the eye of this beast. This will reveal Salazar's body, and this is where we can do real damage. We can actually get knocked off this platform by the swinging arms here, and this will require us to climb back up. But I found that if I just stood back just in the right spot, I could avoid getting hit by these arms and just fire magnum rounds into Salazar until he was dead. With Salazar taken out, Leon heads downstairs to find Ada waiting for him, jet ski ready, headed for the island that Ashley has been taken to. This ends Chapter 4 and begins the final section and chapter of the game. Before we talk about the island, I'd just like to quickly talk about Resident Evil 4's pacing a bit more. The game does a really good job at setting up Sadler as the penultimate villain of this entry. Part of this is because each section of the game has its own distinct villain. The village section has Mendez, the ruling chief of the surrounding area. The Muscle, the enforcer for the Los Illuminados, the man that wants Leon dead, even against his own orders. Salazar represents the opposite, a controlling, manipulative puppet master. A man that cages us in his castle of traps and schemes. He has fun watching Leon and Ashley squirm. Sadler is sort of the happy medium between these two, a powerful enough force in his own right, but sat at the head of the Los Illuminados. He controls things from the top and watches as his captors try to free themselves from his machinations. Taking down Mendez is satisfying, and taking down Salazar is as well, but realizing each time that Sadler is still waiting for us makes us realize that these are only small fry, and the big one is on the horizon. Not only that, but each boss having their own area leaves Sadler for the end game, so that we aren't entirely worn out on him by the time we reach the final hours of this experience. Leon and Ada head to the island, and Ada goes off to do her own thing. Leon is immediately contacted by Sadler as he arrives. He basically tells Leon that he shouldn't be confident just because he took out Sadler's lackeys. We then have to infiltrate the island, a veritable fortress in its own right, distinct from both the village and the castle. The island is full of barricades and makeshift bases meant to hold off outsiders. Once again, the same theme carries through. We are met with new enemies again, though. Soldiers wearing bulletproof vests, manning crossbows, and even men wielding Gatling guns. They aren't quite the shakeup that the Las Plagas was, but they are stronger and more difficult to take down, especially since some of them wear helmets that prevent us from getting clean headshots. We move through the base and eventually get inside, where we find Ashley is being held in a cell. But before we make it there, we are met with an enemy that does shake things up, in that of the Regenerator. The Regenerator just looks like a tall zombie with a larger than normal mouth, but the Regenerator is a bit more than meets the eye. When we first encounter these enemies, we won't easily be able to take them out by just using the same method that we have every other enemy in the game. We find out from a note soon after this encounter that the Regenerators have parasites inside their body that cause them to regrow their limbs. These parasites can only be seen with some sort of thermal imaging, so we need a scope for our rifle that can do just that. Once we have this, we have to target the parasites in the Regenerator's body. This puts the emphasis on precision, and while the Regenerators are slow, they are incredibly dangerous once they finally get up close. Every shot missed sends sweat running down your brow because you know they are just that much closer to getting to you. Once we explore the facility a bit more and cut down some more Regenerators, we can find Ashley's cell and unlock it with a nearby keycard. Once these two are finally reunited, we can get the hell out of here and make our escape. But of course, it isn't as simple as just getting out. We have to jump into a trash chute, kill waves and waves of armored zombies, and fight more Regenerators before Ashley takes control of a dump truck and we ride in the back protecting the vehicle. We blast enemies off the back and ensure that the president's daughter is safe while she gets her forklift license. Once we make it through this intense sequence, we meet Sadler once again. He has some sort of control over the parasite inside Leon, which he activates as Leon tries to attack. He also uses this influence to convince Ashley to come with him. Leon smartly puts a tracker on her before she's taken away again. We then see a scene with Krauser and Ada. Apparently the two are working together, for Wesker, under Sadler's nose. Leon then makes it to a nearby warehouse where he is attacked by Krauser. Leon knows Krauser. They actually worked together for the US government, but Krauser was thought to have died in a plane crash. He wants the sample just like everyone else does. The two battle it out with their knives, pretty evenly matched. Krauser lets it slip that this is all for Umbrella before he decides to shut his mouth, and Ada gets involved. Krauser escapes, and so does Ada. Heading out of this area, Leon has to make his way through a hall full of lasers. I absolutely have to imagine that this sequence was inspired by the first Resident Evil film. Those movies have a weird obsession with the laser hallway, and they just keep coming back to it. Leon can take a rest in the next room on a very comfy throne, imagining what it would be like to be king for a day, but he quickly determines there's no time for rest and heads out. We have another boss fight in the next area, a large cavern with a hanging sequence of storage containers and walkways. This is probably the craziest fight in the game, and honestly the most intense. These containers are split up into sections, each blocked off by a large door. We need to press the buttons to unlock this door and release the previous section to try and trap this large monster, the U3, in it. We can't really defeat this thing quite yet. We just want to get away and send it into this large abyss that these containers hang above. It's intense because we're constantly trying to find the next button, trying not to fall into the chasm below, and trying to get away from this monster all at the same time. We fight the monster fully on the other side of this chasm, but when it scampers up the cliff like a little rat and digs its way into the ground, we have a pretty great fight with it. After this, we head back to the surface and move through some ruins to face Krauser once again. He's keeping Ashley just past this area, but we need 3 insignias to get there. There's 2 in these ruins, but Krauser has the final one. We have to run through the ruins, avoiding Krauser's gunfire, while also fending off his attacks when he gets close.
What do you intend to do restoring Umbrella?
To bring order and balance to this insane world of ours.
A psycho like you can't bring order or balance.
You don't seriously think a conservative mind can chart a new course for the world, do you?
We finally confront Krauser on top of a tower full of explosives. He's using the parasite to transform his body, definitely an unfair advantage, but not one we can't overcome. Krauser is a pain to defeat as he avoids almost all of our shots and uses his massive arm as a shield. We have to get around this shield and his dodging to eventually take him down. If we do so before the timer runs out, we can unlock the door and escape. Sadler thanks Leon for killing Krauser, as he was apparently using him all along, and knew that he wasn't entirely on his side. He plans to use Leon as the same type of pawn once the parasite hatches within him. As Leon continues through the ruins, heading towards Sadler, our helicopter support finally shows up. He takes out a ton of the Ganados for us, and Leon promises to get him a drink when they get out of here.
Thanks. When we get out of here, drinks are on me.
Yeah, hey, I know a good bar.
But he's immediately killed. I don't know why this wrecked me, but it kind of did. I just thought it was so sad. Mike seemed like such a nice guy for all of the 2 seconds that we knew him. R.I.P. Mike. Through the ruins once more, Leon's parasite begins to take hold. Ada shows up and he almost strangles her, but she stops him with a knife to the thigh. He eventually takes some pills to suppress it. Leon finally finds Ashley again, being held in some containment pod. Sadler uses some type of force powers to blast Leon back, and Ada shows up to help out. We manage to escape with Ashley while Ada holds the big man off. Nearby, the 2 find the machine that can remove the parasite from them. The procedure is successful for both of them, so luckily, they're both in the clear. It's time to finally take Ashley out of here and get home. But that's not the end of it yet. Ada is being held on a construction site, strung up by a rope. Leon cuts her down, but Sadler is here. He makes his full transformation, and we see the grotesque final form that he has taken, a mass of limbs exploding from his head, a design that clearly reflects even the simple Las Plagas that we found earlier, but taken all the way. There's many ways for us to do damage to Sadler. We can simply shoot the eyes on his legs, which causes him to fall. We can then use our knife to stab his real eye and do damage. We can also lure him into spots where we can swing hunks of steel at him. Once we do this enough, Ada will toss down a rocket launcher and we can destroy him, just like we've destroyed all the other Resident Evil final bosses so far. Leon goes to pick up the sample and Ada takes it from him, jumping on a helicopter, once again working for her own motivations. She sets the self-destruct on the facility and we have to make it out in less than 3 minutes. We grab Ashley and head to the jet ski, where we get an awesome sequence riding through the caverns and waves to reach the ocean before this place explodes. This game ends in classic Resident Evil style as the hero and his partner are ready to head off into the sunset. Before this happens, Ashley hits on Leon and he declines her because his heart is really with Ada. We then get a final scene where this is immediately contradicted as Leon just starts hitting on Hunnigan. Before I talk about the remake and give my final thoughts on this game, there's one more piece of the story that we have to talk about, and that's Separate Ways. In the PlayStation 2 version of Resident Evil 4, Capcom included a separate mode that you could play upon beating the normal game. This was called Separate Ways and saw you playing as Ada Wong, living through the events of Resident Evil 4. It essentially tells her side of the story, what she was up to while we were running around trying to save Ashley. I won't go too deep into this because it's really only maybe 2 hours worth of a DLC. That being said, it does recontextualize the game and a lot of its story. The DLC takes place across 5 missions that starts with Ada stumbling upon the village while they're burning the body. She gets orders directly from Wesker to ring the church bell to get rid of the Ganados. Her mission here is to gather information about the parasite for Wesker. In between missions, we get debriefings from Ada that fill in some of the gaps of the story. Their theory is that people like Sadler and Salazar are controlling the parasites through the use of a specific frequency, which gives Sadler the ability to do what he can do throughout the story. He doesn't have force powers, guys, it's just parasites. These are all theories at this point though, and Ada needs to retrieve a sample of the parasite to confirm these theories. The second mission sees Ada going to rescue Luis because while he isn't working for Wesker directly, he is helping Ada get the sample that she needs. Most of this DLC is just retracing Leon's steps before he does through the same maps that we've already been through in his story. Some things are changed around and our route is a little bit different, but it's a lot of the same areas that we've already seen. Ada eventually saw Leon and Luis being transported and was the one that rescued Leon from being killed by Mendez. When she escaped though, she was taken captive as well and was almost made a ritual sacrifice. She met with Luis outside of the house that he and Leon were defending. She pushes him to get the sample faster as she needs results. Ada's debrief tells us that she found Luis after she emailed him for help. He wanted out of the organization and was compiling data on the parasite. Of course, Ada wanted something in return for rescuing him, and we already know that she failed this job pretty miserably.
I got it.
The next mission sees Ada reuniting with Leon and her perspective on the Hedge Maze area. She was ordered by Wesker to meet up with Luis to retrieve the sample that he had. He also ordered her to kill Leon, but she of course didn't agree with this since she holds some affection for the former RPD officer. Ada eventually witnesses Luis's death, and Wesker once again tells her to get the sample while the cult is distracted by Leon's presence. The fourth mission of the game sees Ada's quest for the sample continue, but after she's found out that Wesker has ordered Krauser to take out Leon. We travel through the only unique area in this DLC where we have to destroy a battleship. We take out various enemies on the island, and Ada eventually prevents Leon and Krauser from killing each other. In her debrief after the fourth mission, Ada claims that she is the one orchestrating this whole ordeal, making Leon feel like he is in control. But she says that he is a genius and is incredibly effective at survival. The last mission begins as Ada sees the helicopter explosion and reports Krauser's death to Wesker. Our final mission is to, of course, obtain the sample and clean up the aftermath. We do this by running through the island after Leon has already destroyed it. Ada then comes face to face with Krauser, who is apparently still alive. We have another boss fight with him on a series of small buildings. It's basically the same fight as before, just in a new area that utilizes Ada's grappling hook mechanic. Once she finishes Krauser off for good, she heads off and saves Leon from Sadler. We end up facing Sadler after Leon escapes. He's actually a new boss that can dash incredibly fast and deal a ton of damage. He functions a lot like his transformed self though, in that he has the same weakness, an eye that tries to escape from his mouth. After defeating him, obviously not for good, Ada is captured. As Leon fights his final battle against Krauser off in the distance, we have to take out enemies above him and eventually toss down the rocket launcher that he uses to finish the job. We then get to see a scene where Ada flies off in the chopper. She sees the sunset as she's completed her mission and retrieved the sample, a job well done and a finale ending in a sunset. We get one final scene after the credits, another debrief from Ada. She was double, triple, quadruple crossing Wesker, as she's actually working for another organization. Wesker has been trying to form his own umbrella after the fallout of the first one. The organization Ada is working for wants to find out what he's up to. She hints at a larger ploy down the line for them, but that will have to be for next time. I think this DLC overall is pretty good. I think the first few missions are a little weak because it does just feel like replaying certain parts of the main game. Though Ada gets some unique weapons of her own that make it feel distinct, the last few missions of the DLC set themselves apart quite a bit. And I really like the idea of being able to see who was helping our main hero during the final boss battle. Just being able to see Leon and Sadler fighting off in the distance is really cool, and it kind of feels like the ultimate culmination of the original idea for Resident Evil. Two people traveling throughout the same environment and solving puzzles to make their goals complete. It also properly weaves Umbrella, or at least what's left of them, and Wesker back into the overall story. Once we see what is going on behind the scenes, it really feels like there's larger things at play here. It also works to make the original game truly feel like it's from Leon's perspective. The story is almost incomplete without it because Leon doesn't know everything. He doesn't need to know everything. He had one goal and one mission coming in here, to rescue the president's daughter, and he did that. There's also the incredibly fun Mercenaries mode, which allows us to play multiple characters across different maps. It's sort of a free kill mode where we try to kill as many enemies as we can before time runs out. I thought this one was pretty fun, but that the remake Mercenaries beat it out by quite a lot. Resident Evil 4 as a whole is a shockingly good game. But before I can wrap up with my final thoughts, I'd like to talk about when Capcom revisited this game for another remake. Development on the remake of Resident Evil 4 actually began around 2018. It was originally being developed by a studio called M2, but was eventually taken over by Capcom in 2021. The game was revealed at a 2022 State of Play, and then was subsequently released on March 24th, 2024 for PlayStation 4, 5, Windows, and Xbox Series platforms. Resident Evil 4 Remake was developed in the RE engine, just like Resident Evil 2 and 3's remakes. This means that it uses a lot of the same systems that those games did. It does feel a lot like those remakes, but just with Resident Evil 4 mechanics. Of course, we can melee head kick enemies, we can suplex, but there's also a larger focus on the knife mechanics. Our knife now has a durability meter, because our knife will be incredibly important in this game. Whenever we are attacked or grabbed, we can counter this grab immediately by stabbing the enemy with our knife. This takes some durability away from our weapon, but gets us out of the grab quickly. This is probably one of the best changes from the remake because it gives us an immediate counter, and an out from battle if we're overwhelmed. And it's very easy to get overwhelmed because, just like the original Resident Evil 4, there are a ton of enemies. There are a lot of overall changes to general mechanics. We now have an auto-sort system for our inventory, so if you didn't like the sorting minigame that the original had, you can now skip it. There's a crafting system that allows us to make our own ammo or grenades. The merchant system has been expanded to put a larger emphasis on the types and combinations of gems that we place in treasure, making them more valuable. We can now parry attacks with our knife just by pressing a button, which adds another element to close combat encounters. Instead of just the blue medallion side quest from the original, there are a ton of different merchant requests that we can take on throughout the game. These will give us spinels, which are not directly sellable anymore, but can be traded for exclusive rewards from the merchant. There are new enemies, new collectibles, new weapons. The Resident Evil 4 Remake introduces a lot of new stuff, to the point that it actually just feels like its own thing. Obviously, this was true of the previous two remake games, but those were obviously going to feel like their own thing because they were such a drastic difference from their PS1 counterparts. But Resident Evil 4 Remake feels like a separate game almost, and I honestly had a hard time determining whether it was actually better than the original or not, because both games are really just going for completely separate vibes. One of the biggest changes that Resident Evil 4 Remake implements is in that of its story. The game adds a lot in the form of cutscenes and conversations, but it does a ton of work to better flesh out its characters. One of my favorite things that the remake does is introduce these new scenes with Leon's infection. Throughout the game, as Leon's infection spreads, he starts to hallucinate a bit, and this eventually culminates in a scene at the end of the game where he carries Ashley to the machine that will remove her infection. First of all, I think these scenes better place us in the shoes of Leon and bring us closer to his character and what he's going through at this point. It also kind of feels like the team implementing ideas that they had in the original versions of Resident Evil 4. Watching these scenes, I couldn't help but think that they looked strikingly like what they described in the hallucination and Hookman versions of the game. Speaking of those versions of the game, Resident Evil 4 puts a much larger emphasis on horror than the original game does. While Resident Evil 4 can be scary, the remake ensures that it puts you in a lot of dark, atmospheric environments to push that emotion even further. The section with Ashley crawling through the library and mausoleum is now even more terrifying, as the emphasis is placed on stunning enemies rather than dodging them or taking them out entirely. This means that we can't exactly get rid of them. They need to continue to chase us around as Ashley wields this blue light lantern. The final sequence where she has to run away from a group of animated suits of armor without this power in her hands is intense and terrifying. The regenerators are now faster, meaning that encounters with them are far more intense than they were before. The regenerators in the original game were very effective at delivering a jaw-clenching combat encounter, but making them a bit quicker and more aggressive means that every single shot counts. I found myself actually holding my breath while fighting these things, and whenever I missed a shot, I took an audible gasp of air as the thing got even closer to me. And as I've said with every one of these remakes, these games look fantastic. Resident Evil 4 Remake adds in beautiful lighting to make the castle feel more grand and to make the back halls and sewers feel more unsettling and grotesque. Some of the best work that the remake does, though, is in developing its characters further. The team took a new approach to Ashley so that she doesn't just hit on Leon at the end of the game. The story works to establish her character as a teammate with Leon a bit further. Their relationship develops into a friendship more than a potential romantic one. Luis is more present in this game, even helping us in certain sections and living a bit longer. He's also given more screen time, so we get a bit more of that classic Luis snark.
Now where's the amber?
Fortunately, it's not on me at the moment. And you really should be telling me what a good job I did. Busted my ass and managed to hide it right before I got caught.
Salazar is redesigned a bit to look even more like a little freak than he did before, though he's not as goofy as he was in the original. You can tell the team were trying to take the character a bit more seriously across the board. But by far the best work the remake does is in that of Krauser. In this game, Krauser's relationship with Leon is stressed a bit more. Krauser actually returns in a game called The Dark Side Chronicles, a game I will eventually cover in the future. One of the sections of that game goes further into Operation Javier, where Leon and Krauser worked together. Krauser hints at their past in the original game, but the remake clearly establishes the mentor-protege dynamic between the two. Krauser is built up to be the overbearing teacher that is putting Leon through harsh trials because he feels that he's too weak and didn't take any of his teachings. The final battle that we have with him is built up even further as Krauser sets up a bloody stage for the two to fight in, filled with traps. The ruins now feel like Jack Krauser's little house of horrors or something as we wander through the place, getting jumped around every corner. And when we finally finish Krauser off, the two get a touching goodbye that puts a final end to their story. There's also a ton of new information in the game in the form of files, extra cutscenes, and new lines of dialogue. We get a lot of extra lore on the Los Illuminados. We get extra information on characters. When we eventually find Luis's lab, we can even see pictures of him working with Umbrella before he joined the cult. The main game of the remake does remove some things like the U3 boss fight that was in the original. I wasn't really too upset about this because by the end of the remake, it had already felt like it was going on a bit long and needed to finish things up anyways. It's also worth noting that the game remixes a lot of its areas. While most of the areas are kept intact, their order is generally changed just to make things work a bit better for the narrative experience. Resident Evil 4 Remake also places a much larger emphasis on exploration. There's a particular chapter at the beginning of the game when we get access to the boat, where we can spend easily an hour or two just running around and picking up extra items, completing merchant requests. This was one of my favorite parts of the original game, just how much it rewarded the player for looking into every nook and cranny and exploring the world. The remake takes that up a notch, and it always feels like there's a reason to keep looking around. The remake also improves the shooting gallery minigame. We now shoot pirates instead of Ganados and Ashley. This was probably done to make the minigame more realistic in-world. Like, why did the merchant just have a bunch of Ashley standees made on hand? Kinda creepy, man. But also, these shooting minigames no longer give us currency for completing them. They actually give us silver or gold tokens based on the score we got, if we managed to shoot these Deadeye tokens on specific targets, and whether we shot all of them or not. These tokens can then be used in a gacha machine, which spits out charms that we can then equip to our attaché case for different buffs. Now, I will say that I do like the shooting minigame in the remake more than the original. This is mostly just because the shooting in general is improved, so it's a lot more fun from a mechanics standpoint. But I don't like the way that the rewards are implemented. I would get really excited when I got an S rank or a really good score on one of these minigames, and then kind of bummed out because I realized that all I was going to get for it were these lame-ass case charms. The charms themselves are pretty cool, but most of their buffs are rarely ever that interesting. Some of them are really good, giving us a higher critical rate with our knife, giving us money off of weapon upgrades, or reducing the amount of gunpowder required for crafting. But we end up getting a lot of them, so if you want to make the best use of them, it would make sense to switch charms off before you're going to craft or upgrade weapons, which gets in the way of the flow of gameplay. It also just feels like a more satisfying reward for this system would have been more gems, treasure, item attachments, or even spinels. While the actual minigame itself is fun, and I still would have completed it just for its own sake, it would have been nice if this was as rewarding as it was in the original. Resident Evil 4 Remake also sees the return of the challenge system from Resident Evil 3. We have a ton of different challenges we can complete, which range from simple things like completing chapters to finding hidden objectives in the game. We get points for these, which can be used to unlock viewable models like the original game's bottle cap figures. We can also unlock weapons, outfits, accessories, all kinds of cool stuff. Resident Evil 4 just has a really good idea of its own systems, and it masterfully ties all of those systems back into each other to create this incredibly rewarding, dopamine-fueled cycle that you never want to leave. There's so many things to unlock, to complete, to find. Hidden treasure is all over the map. Medallions and requests are everywhere. Rewards await you around every single corner. It completely magnifies what made the original game so fun and addicting. Resident Evil 4 Remake does also remove the QTEs from the original game. We can still fast press a button when being grabbed if we don't happen to have a knife on us, but that's about it. As you know, I wasn't a big fan of the QTEs in the original, so this was a good change in my mind. The game also remixes a lot of its bosses. Salazar is no longer a stationary fight on a platform. The monster now moves around and slings itself across the room and whirls its body at Leon. The final fight no longer has annoying bridges that we have to jump across. It now takes place on several long platforms across the water. And when we finally beat Sadler, we have to destroy this sort of internal pod while his tendrils try to grip onto their last signs of life by trying to crush us. The ending is also a little bit different, with Ada actually turning on Wesker and taking the sample for herself. Leon even makes sure to name drop the upcoming DLC in the finale.
I think we both know this. It's where we go our separate ways.
Speaking of Separate Ways, the remake had its own version of Separate Ways, and while it's difficult to say whether the original Resident Evil 4 or the remake is better, it's much clearer with the game's DLCs. Separate Ways Remake is miles better than the original. The original mode was basically just 5 little missions that saw you running through mostly the same paths as Leon, with one new level in that of the battleship. Its strongest addition was in that of narrative, but the Separate Ways Remake actually feels like its own distinct version of the game. It actually starts before Leon arrives at the village. Instead of having Ada just show up as Leon gets there, she's already there rescuing Luis. Ada also has her own personal boss that's exclusive to this mode, that of the Passanta, which is really just U3, but we actually fight it instead of trapping it in a box. U3 will track Ada throughout the game, and each time we encounter it, we have to defeat it while it toys with Ada's mind, creating hallucinations to confuse us. This all eventually culminates in a final fight that's actually pretty difficult, and it gets split into 2 phases. Once we defeat the main body, we have to attack this sort of detached Plagas that digs underground. It's obviously a slight evolution of the U3 fight, and it's cool that this boss was included here. There's actually a ton of stuff that's included in Separate Ways that was removed from the original game. I'm not sure if this was their original plan or if they decided to do this after releasing the base game. The laser hallway is here, the smashing columns obstacle, the drill chasing us down a hall, just a bunch of things that weren't included in Resident Evil 4 Remake. And it's not like I was playing the game and wondering where these were. I was fine knowing that they were gone, but when I started Separate Ways, it was so cool to see these little references return. Speaking of the laser hallway, this section actually comes when Ada infiltrates a Los Illuminados lab and finds a test subject that is so strong it can only be killed by the lasers, which of course means we have to lure it into this hallway, and it is one of the coolest scenes in the entire game. Wesker also shows up physically on the island instead of communicating with Ada through codec the entire game. This leads to some pretty intense scenes between the two characters, and it makes Wesker a lot more of an intimidating presence in the long run. Separate Ways basically plays like Resident Evil 4 Remake though. Ada takes a bit more damage when getting hit, just like in the original, but she also has her grappling hook, which is used a lot better in this entry. In the original, it could be a bit awkward to get the prompt to pop up, but here it's great. It works perfectly. Ada can also use it to close the distance with enemies, making melee finishing attacks so satisfying. She also uses it to melee attack enemies, which results in some absolutely insane scenes. One of the best things that Separate Ways does is work to further Luis's character even more though. It shows how far he was willing to go to help out Ashley and Leon, even running into a burning part of the castle to try and retrieve the serum for their infection. The remake version of this DLC also just has a ton more narrative cohesion. A lot of the original just felt like it was trying to fit Ada in where they could and jumping around the base game to the points where she was involved. But in this version, Ada is off having her own story, her own adventures, her own problems, and then getting involved back in the main narrative when she needs to. It all feels a lot more smooth and cohesive than it did before. There's also a post-credit scene where Wesker learns that Ada has gone rogue and decides to let her go. He has plans of his own, and this ending on his massive ship in the middle of the ocean feels like it properly sets up Wesker's return for maybe Resident Evil 5 Remake. This DLC just feels so unique, and it's things like this that make these games so great. The fact that this story is only $10 is insane, because it's very polished, very well made, and just as fun to play as the main game. There's also a Mercenaries mode in this game, and it is one of the funnest extra modes I've played in a video game. You play one of 5 characters, 7 if you count the extra 2 characters for Ada and Leon's costumes. These characters all have different weapons and starting gear types. Leon starts with a pistol, shotgun, and rifle, while Luis starts with a Red 9 and a rifle. Each character plays a bit differently, each also having their own special mode that they can activate once you've gotten a certain number of kills and charged up their bar. Leon and Ada's seem to just give critical hits more often and give you more points for headshotting enemies. Luis's is the worst because he can just place dynamite for a short period of time, which never works out like you think it will. Krauser's is the most insane because you can activate his parasite powers for a brief period of time and just absolutely decimate enemies. You obviously get points for killing enemies, but you get more time added to the timer for getting headshots and kills in your special mode. After you kill a certain number of enemies, a boss will spawn. These are different based on the map you're in. The castle will have zealots spawn, while the island has some sort of golden chainsaw man that attacks incredibly fast and is easily the most intimidating enemy in the whole game. This mode is just so fun. You get rewarded a ton by being able to unlock characters under certain conditions. Hunk is even in this mode, and that's just awesome to see him return in another one of these. It's honestly really hard to put down because you're just constantly chasing a higher score. It's one of those things that you just can't even believe is packed into this game that already has a ton of great polished content. And suddenly, there's an extra mode that you can easily sink a ton of hours into on its own. The remake as a whole is just an incredible experience. I think my only complaint with the whole thing is that it just doesn't have as much of that campy charm as the original, but that's the sacrifice that you pay for trying to take the characters a bit more seriously. It's a trade-off in the end, and I think it honestly puts the game on an even field with the original. Both games are just 2 flavors of the same ice cream. It's the same ingredients, just a different additive at the end of the day results in 2 products that look the same but taste wildly separate. And this is the last of the remakes that I'll have to talk about for what I assume is a while, and I just want to say that all of these games are fantastic. Of course, 3 has its reputation, and it doesn't fully deliver on the Resident Evil 3 experience. But the fact that games like RE1 Remake, RE2 Remake, and RE4 Remake exist is insane. That Capcom is going to these lengths to remake these games from the ground up, that they're putting in this effort, this money, and that they're doing so well is great to see. Because we see a lot of remakes these days, and a lot of them end up so tonally different from the game that they're trying to recreate. But I feel like for a long time now, Capcom has had a very good hold on their games and why they succeeded in the first place. I can't wait to see what they remake next, and I really hope it's Code Veronica. Resident Evil 4 Remake was met with critical praise on its release. Most praised its graphics, controls, and some of its new mechanics. It currently has a 93 out of 100 on Metacritic for the PS5 version of the game. The remake also did well with fans, selling 3 million copies in the first 2 days of release, and 9 million copies after 8 months. Resident Evil 4 is an important game, not just because of its quality, but because of its legacy. Resident Evil 4's goal was to innovate, and that was clear from the start. Mikami wanted to make something new, something fresh. He saw Resident Evil going down the same path that many series do, trying to recreate the magic that got them here in the first place. But the team at Capcom took the complete opposite approach, taking everything that they did originally and tweaking it to create a different mold. This mold would be the blueprint and inspiration for many successful series down the line, inspiring Gears of War, Dead Space, and Uncharted. Resident Evil 4 has a reach that extends far beyond its own franchise. It affected and changed the gaming landscape for the foreseeable future. While some games dare to touch perfection, not many can lay claim to that accolade. And Resident Evil 4 does dare. There are very few things in its entire runtime that I can find to even complain about if I wanted to. It's rare that I want to play a game again by the time I finish it. Once I'm done with a game, I usually want to move on to something else, to take some time away from it and breathe some new air. If a game is really good, then maybe in a few months I'll think about returning to it and giving it another go. But Resident Evil 4 was a different story entirely. I wanted to play it again as soon as I finished it. I wanted to play Separate Ways. I wanted to play the Mercenaries mode. I wanted to try the Wii version. I wanted to try the VR modes. I just couldn't get enough. I've talked about this game's narrative, its gameplay, its style, but it's quite hard to articulate why this game is just so addicting. I think it's mainly because the game just perfectly nails how to reward the player effectively through visual cues, satisfying boss battles, treasure systems, more resources, story moments, fun set pieces, and most importantly, hordes of enemies to kill. It's an assembly line that perfectly constructs a dopamine meal, and playing Resident Evil 4 places you directly at the end of the conveyor belt. I can't really exactly agree that the Resident Evil series was in a slump before this. I enjoyed Code Veronica, and the only game that I didn't really like was Zero. And I can't say that, looking back, I wouldn't have preferred more fixed camera survival horror games, but that's mostly because those games have fallen out of favor with the wider gaming audience today. I do wish Capcom would have continued developing more of those on the side, but I say all of this to make the point that I'm not sure I would have taken the pitch for Resident Evil 4 before it released. Let's change this dedicated survival horror franchise into an over-the-shoulder shooter and focus it more on big set pieces and action. I would have been entirely against that, and I would have been wrong. Resident Evil 4 was one of the most successful video games of the time. It received critical acclaim on release with a 96 out of 100 on Metacritic for the original GameCube version of the game. It won multiple Golden Joystick Awards, multiple Spike Video Game Awards, and Famitsu's Grand Prize for the year. By the end of 2005, the year of its release, Resident Evil 4 had shipped 3 million units across the GameCube and PlayStation 2. And its legacy persists to this day, as many consider it among the best video games ever made, constantly achieving spots on those meaningless lists from the likes of IGN or Game Rant. But while Resident Evil 4 did not try to recreate the magic of their early successes, the next few years would prove that Capcom was trying to recreate the success of Resident Evil 4. But we'll talk about that next time. Bye, Dad. Thanks again for watching this video. What do you think about Resident Evil 4 and its remake? Do you like it? Do you hate it? Leave a comment below and let me know what you think. Also, I'd like to thank my patrons for making this video possible. If you want to be added to this list of amazing people you see here, then go to the link in my description and subscribe to the Patreon. I've been reviewing the Resident Evil movies over there recently, and it's been a great time. Those videos are exclusive to Patreon, so you can't get them anywhere else. Thanks again. See you next time.